We are Flake, Rose, and Spears, and we are back. This week we have the special honor of having Professor Woods on. Professor Woods, how your week been?
I'm good, man. Tired. I don't know about y'all, but I don't know if I've ever been more tired than I have been in the last year and a half. I mean, between COVID and the insurrection, these police murders, I mean, it's a lot. It wears on your spirit. So I'm good. I'm blessed. My family is okay. But yeah, that's just a sigh. I'm tired, man.
Definitely can understand that. Flake, how about you?
Hey, it's your big kinfolk, Jay Flake. Definitely can feel where you come from on that, Professor Woods. I checked out a couple of times as well to take a break. Before as this past week go, it was success. My daughter, like I told y'all the last episode, we celebrated her 19th birthday. We went out to escape the trap out of North Nashville, which was a lot of fun. There was a lot of fun. We did not escape. We didn't quite make it. But the clues and everything was great. I was trying to, let them do their own thing and walk through there and find out their own clues. But I mean, they done grew up in the neighborhood that we all might have grew up in. So some of that stuff they trying to Google and everything else. So it was quite entertaining. But had a good time being around the ladies. While we was out, even the fella asked me, he was like, "Man, how you get stuck with all these girls, man?" I said, "It's my daughter's birthday, man, and everybody came out to have a good time." So I had a good time with that. Also got a chance to stop by Flash Meet Nashville. If you hadn't checked that out, please check out Flash Meet Nashville. They had a beat battle there Saturday night. So it was Memphis versus Nashville. So we had a lot of people from West Tennessee, Memphis in the area, in the building. And they was out there showing off their beats for anybody who likes to rap, R&B music, this, that, and other. There was a lot of producers there that you could have connected with. So overall, man, my week has been good. I have no complaints at all. Everybody's still healthy. So far, man, it's been good.
Yeah, that's dope. I got to come check out that Escape the Trap, though. I want to just see the context clues of how you would get out. I think that'll be cool. But yeah, this is D Rose. Professor Woods, I definitely get where you're coming from in regards to tired. I used to be a person that didn't care for naps. But now, anytime that I'm feeling mentally just drained, I would definitely just turn off everything, put the phone on D&D, and just get some much needed rest, just kind of disconnect from the world. I think that does better than going out in facing some of the things and maybe reacting out of emotion. So I definitely feel you there. But overall, it's been a cool week. It's Juneteenth week, so it's definitely a lot to celebrate and be proud for. So I'm looking forward to a lot of fellowship, a lot of connections. And the bar crawl weekend, this weekend, and the run that we have on Saturday with ZFT. So it's a lot of melanated excellence to celebrate. So no complaints. Everybody's still here. Everybody's still breathing. So who am I to complain? But how about you, Spears?
My week's been good in itself. And I can echo the sentiments of Professor Woods as far as being tired. And y'all kings know, especially the many episodes we have done over the murders and the deaths of our Black kings and queens throughout our year and a half process with, our podcast and everything. It is very draining and tiring. And again, like Professor would say, you're good personally for the most part and everything. But as far as, just the drain of your people and the culture and the community, it just can be very burdensome. And so I can echo those sentiments exactly. My son was in Detroit. He just got back from Detroit visiting his mother's side of the family or whatever, my oldest son. So I didn't get to see him this weekend, but I had my daughter and I took her to Dave & Buster's and she busted my ass in a couple of games and stuff. So she had the bragging rights after I was talking noise to her, talking about, I'm going to win because I'm a Spears. And she said, you must have forgot my last name. And then after she busted my behind, she was talking about, I told you, I'm the Spears who going to win. So that was fun, and being able to spend time with with my children is always a blessing and a good thing. So, like you said, Juneteenth weekend coming up, ready to travel to Houston to take care of business first with the anniversary run, and then turn some things up and have a good time with some Black excellence, like as you stated. This week, like I said, we have a special guest. Flake, I'm gonna allow you to do your things and start the conversation off so we can educate ourselves and educate our listeners and supporters.
Well, as you heard from the beginning, we have Professor Woods with us this week. I was able to locate him through one of my comedian friends and said, I kind of threw a fishing line out there. I was like, hey, I would like to have this discussion. I wasn't planning on being this week, but I had a turnaround so fast. I said, let me reach out to this person ASAP and let's have this conversation as soon as possible, especially with the way the housing market has grown in Nashville. I know the housing market has grown in Houston from when I was down there visiting. I know some parts of Dallas that also coming up in areas. If you go 2 hours away from here in Huntsville, Alabama, they are gentrifying that area as well. And there's a lot of houses going up in Huntsville as Huntsville is beginning to grow, as they start to bring more, space exploration and tech down there. So the topic of the night is basically going to be about redlining, the effect it's had on Black people as a community, the effect it has on even other people that's not our particular race, especially when they come back and redline it, and then come back and say, hey, we finna buy this land up or gentrified, whatever that case is. It all starts off as being, so a lot of people don't know that some of these communities that Black people live in were once prominent communities, and then we moved in. Then the thing was to drive it down and then come back and buy it cheap and try to build it back up. So I just want to have that discussion and bring on a professional on here, Mr. Professor Woods, that can, deep dive into that, because we know somewhat about it, but he knows probably more than what we know. This has been going on for a very, very, very long time. In some cases, it's still happening today. As we seen recently, a lady was selling her house, and when she got inspected, was offered about $200,000. I think it was $150,000 less from when she had a white person come and sit in for that same offer and inspection on the house. So we know those things are going on. They're being reported. That's not the only first case. That was just one of the many cases that hit the headline, but it was a couple of cases that where it hit the headline. Also, as you know, I spoke about, I just recently bought a house, and our realtor, which is a Black lady, my auntie, when we sold our previous house, pretty much said we had stuff in there when we visited Jamaica, pictures, all the stuff. She was like, take every last bit of that down. First house I sold, which seemed strange to me, and then she sat me down and said, look, nephew, this what's going on, and this is why you got to do that. So Professor Woods, one thing I'd like for you to touch on is some people don't realize is that how redlining has taken money out of our pockets and how it's affected us when people say, won't you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps?
Right. Great question. And I appreciate y'all for having me on again. I'll say this. So when people talk about discrimination, big picture, or racism, sometimes people they confuse prejudice and racism. And for me, everybody's prejudice. Everybody has a prejudice. But what makes an ism like racism or sexism so much bigger and more significant than prejudice is it's the ability to codify or to legislate prejudice into policy. And redlining is the perfect example of how the country, the federal government really, constructed an appraisal process that codified bigotry or discrimination. So the redlining maps and redlining maps were created by the Homeowner Loan Corporation, which is a component of the federal banking infrastructure that was created after the New Deal, during the New Deal, after the Great Depression. And In the National Archives, too, in College Park, they have hundreds of maps. Every city in America that had a population larger than 40,000 in the 1930s and 40s has one of these maps. Nashville, New York, Houston, Dallas. I mean, many of these cities have, Buffalo, lots of cities have these maps. And, for redlining, basically what this appraisal philosophy did was it broke down neighborhoods in cities with a population over 40,000 into 4 categories. And they color coded the categories. So there was green, which was best, blue, which was still desirable, yellow, which was definitely declining, and red, which was hazardous. And so the federal government defined neighborhoods with Black people in it as hazardous bank investments and literally drew a red line around that section of the city. And in their standard appraisal, so they have the maps, then they have these area descriptions that describe what each area of the map is. They have a section that has Negro and the percentage. There's a section that has foreign born and the percentage. And then there's a section that has infiltration or shifting population. And why this is significant is that they were appraising people and the property that they inhabited. And when the federal government defines Black and brown people as hazardous, now it's terrible, right? But Black people, whenever Black people were in an area, it was red. But red was not, having an area be hazardous wasn't always for Black people. Sometimes it could be Latino, sometimes it could be Asian. In some instances, like in New York and other places up on the Eastern Seaboard, Italians, Jews could also be redlined periodically in some areas. But a lot of that goes away by the 1940s and 50s in the post-war period. But why this is significant is the racial stigma that the federal government constructed has never really been, Black people haven't been able to get beyond that stigma. So if you think about it, part of the reason why neighborhoods or cities or sections of cities that were once predominantly Black can be gentrified, they started this process in urban renewal in the 1960s. James Baldwin famously called urban renewal Negro removal, right? There's a lot of truth to that. Gentrification is just a more modern version of Negro removal. So the neighborhoods are not stigmatized. The people who live in the neighborhoods are stigmatized. You remove the people, the neighborhood can come back and flourish in a way that it didn't or wasn't able to when these communities, when people couldn't go anywhere else, where they couldn't live anywhere else. And so I think that what we're seeing today around the country is an effort essentially to transform the landscape in a way that we haven't seen in a while. In the 50s and 60s, it was vanilla suburbs and chocolate cities. That phenomenon is becoming inverse, where you have in vanilla cities and chocolate suburbs as people get displaced further and further out. And as you know, I mean, what happens is Black people's wealth is not as strong as about a tenth of what the wealth is for white Americans. And all you need to do is raise the property value, property taxes to a certain level, and the displacement kind of happens on its own in more contemporary times. So that's just a brief, I don't want to belabor it because I want us to have a conversation, but that's a brief overview of redlining. And then there are other federal agencies like the Federal Housing Administration that added to that as well. Later during the GI Bill, the Veterans Administration got into this component too in terms of housing, but all of the federal agencies define Black people either as hazardous, homeowner loan corporation, or the Federal Housing Administration defined Black and brown people as an adverse influence on the neighborhood. And they required protection from adverse influences in order to get federal lending for neighborhoods. And so, yeah, dude, it's a lot. And just to give you an example of why this is so significant, still lingering, the Black home ownership rate today is less than the white home ownership rate was in the year 1940. And it's not because white Americans saved more or were more frugal or whatever. It's that federal policies that infused billions of dollars into private housing through the Federal Housing Administration, through the Veterans Administration. 98% of that money went to white Americans at a time when most Americans could not afford to buy a house on their own. And so they changed the terms and flooded the market with money that disproportionately, overwhelmingly went to white Americans only.
Professor Woods, first, I have a question for you, but before you answer your question, can you please allow our listeners to know what you're a professor of and at what institution you're a professor of?
Okay,
well, my
sure.
question for you is it now in today's age, is it more of a systemic problem or is it still a problem of an individual in their heart? Because I understand there's redlining, there's gentrification, there's all of this stuff, but certain people who work in the banking infrastructure and do all of that, do they literally have to follow those rules and guidelines that were set up by the federal government? Or can they pick and choose and say, I'm gonna give you the same deal as I'm giving your Caucasian counterpart, or I'm gonna give you this loan, or I'm gonna bless you like that? So is it more of a systemic problem, or is it more of an individual problem, or is it both?
Great question. So Lewis Woods, I'm a professor, associate professor of history, African-American history in particular, at Middle Tennessee State University. And before I was in the role that I'm in now, where I'm influencing the social justice initiative that President McPhee launched in July of last year, 2020, I was also the Africana Studies major program director, right? So I'm about this work, man. I'm about it. I'm interested in the community and also just in terms of the research and the like. And so it's a great question. So I'll give you an example from the past of how banks were influenced by federal policy. So the Federal Housing Administration was established 1934. What it did was, before the Federal Housing Administration was created, homeowners had to put down 50% of the total home value down at closing. And then they had 5 to 7 years to pay back the other 50%, right? So in today's dollars, the median home value in the nation is about $340,000, right? So you'd have to put down $170,000 in cash down at closing, and then have 5 to 7 years to come up with the additional $170,000. So at that point in 1930, coming off of the Great Depression, only about 30% of Americans were able to afford to buy a home. That number doubles in 30 years, from 30% to 62%. And why this is significant is because what the Federal Housing Administration did was they took the 50% required at closing and shrunk it to 20%. Then they extended the amount of time to pay back the loan from 5 to 7 years to initially 20 years and then later 30 years, right? And so by doing that, they were able to make the monthly payments cheaper than rent, more affordable than rent, right? That's one. Two, because they guaranteed 80% of the loan value, right? And the homeowner was responsible for 20% upfront at closing, banks could essentially get 4 to 5% interest on a loan for at least a generation, in some cases 30 years, with no risk whatsoever. Federal government backs 80, individual homeowners puts down 20, and we collect interest for over a generation with no risk. If they go belly up, the federal government comes in. We can't lose. So even banks back in the day that didn't want to be a part of the discriminatory policies of the federal government felt compelled to, because banks are adverse to risk, right? And so why this is significant, the Federal Housing Administration created an underwriting manual, and the underwriting manual basically said things like, if a neighborhood is to retain its value or its stability, it has to be inhabited by the same social and racial classes, right? The presence of, they called it inharmonious racial elements, inharmonious racial groups, this is their language, ruins property values, essentially. So banks had a vested interest in order to keep their no risk interest money to incorporate FHA lending. Homeowners who couldn't afford 50% down would be encouraged to protect their neighborhood from adverse influences, which was defined by Black and brown people, right? And so that's the past, that's the history. I think today individuals understand that because stigma still exists, racial stigma in the housing market still exists. I may like Black people as an individual, right? But I may not want Black people in my neighborhood if it's going to negatively affect my my property value. And since home ownership, the equity in your home, right? What your home is valued minus what you owe, the equity, that's what is for most middle-class Americans, that's where the money is. That's where your wealth is in your equity of your home. And so Brookings came out with a study recently, this is maybe a year or two ago, that essentially said that a Black home with the exact same amenities, a Black home in a Black neighborhood with the exact same amenities as a white home in a white neighborhood is valued on average $48,000 and change less in a Black neighborhood than it is in a white neighborhood. And the Brookings Institute study said that on average, that influences Black people's equity and wealth to the tune of $156 billion. That's as of a year or two ago. So same home, three bedrooms, 2.5 baths, same house, same amenities, just in a different neighborhood, a white neighborhood, a Black neighborhood. You're talking about $48K plus per home, $156 billion nationally for Black homeowners. So white Americans have a very difficult choice to make on an individual level, because I may enjoy my interaction with Black people, but I don't enjoy my interaction with Black neighbors, right? And so I think part of the struggle is there, because of the systemic piece, because of the fact that the federal government, multiple agencies in the federal government define Black people as either hazardous bank investments or adverse influences on neighborhoods. It was very difficult, for individual homeowners to do anything different. It's very difficult for banks to do anything different. And I'll say this last piece, I've got a document from the NAACP papers from the 1940s, the National Board, the National Real Estate Boards, National Association of Real Estate Boards, was the largest real estate entity in the country at the time. They said in their code of ethics that there were 4 groups that any good realtor would want to keep out of a reputable neighborhood. They labeled the 4 as follows. Basically, a bootlegger, a madam or a prostitute, a gangster, or, quote, a colored man of means who wanted to give his kids a college education and believed that they deserved to live among whites. End quote. That is the National Real Estate Board. Right, go ahead.
I was on board the first 3. I said, okay, I can see that. But when you got to reason number 4, now that's the type of person I want in my neighborhood.
It should be.
Because they're going to upkeep the value on the house. Now, I ain't got worried about them association come saying, hey, man, why you got these cars in the yard? Why you ain't mowing your yard? Why you throwing a party every day? That's somebody I had to worry about. He just out here trying to make it. He used to provide for his family, leave something for their family to do better. but this type of person that they don't want in their neighborhood. So basically, they don't want no uppity nigga in their neighborhood. That's what I heard.
Yeah, well, pretty much. And I think that's part of the struggle, is that redlining for me is really a euphemism for all of the struggles and barriers that Black people face when they tried to buy a house. So I'm just trying to break down different examples, right? There's a real estate component, there's a federal housing administration component, there's a veteran administration component, there's a homeowner loan corporation component that created the redlining maps. And if you're interested in seeing this, there's an incredible website called Mapping Inequality. Mapping Inequality is amazing because it allows you to look at the redlining maps and the area descriptions in real life, in real terms. You can look at it, go to your city, see what it was like in the 30s and the 40s. And what's crazy is that there is about a 75% correlation between areas that were red in the 30s and 40s and wealth and resources in the neighborhoods today. So part of the struggle that we have as a community is that there were so many barriers to accessing housing. There was another component challenge that was around into the 1940s legally, called restrictive covenants, where individual homeowners would band together and agree never to sell their homes to people of color. And they wrote that in the deeds of sale. And so once you sold a home, that component of the exclusionary covenant, right? No Negroes. In Nashville, they'll say no people of African blood or descent. In other places, it's no non-whites. Sometimes they kick out Asians. In other places, sometimes Latinos, but it's always Black that they exclude. And this was legal until 1948. Until in May of 48, Shelby versus Kramer was the Supreme Court case that invalidated it. But basically what would happen is homeowners would sue each other. So if I'm a white person and I put a covenant into my property deed, and everybody in the neighborhood signs that same property deed, and then some white person down the street sells their home to a Black person or a brown person, I can sue them for damages. Okay. And so what ends up happening, man, is that what Shelby versus Kramer says, Shelby versus Kramer, I'm sorry, says in 1948 is you can no longer sue each other over those covenants. But if you agree to do it and you don't put it in the deeds records office, it's still okay. So even after they outlaw it, there's still kind of that loophole. So you've got layers from the federal government all the way down, real estate agencies, to the individual homeowner that keeps Black people out of neighborhoods, man. And so for me, the more I study housing barriers, the more I'm amazed that Black people bought homes at all. Like, yo, y'all did that thing to be able to that's a lot of obstacles to dodge, right? In and out and weave and bob and weave to get your home. And so, yeah, man, I think it's a great question. I think it's difficult to overcome a stigma established by the federal government and real estate agencies and banks and individual homeowners. It's a lot. And I think that the legacy that we have, that we see today, it's so deep, man. So most of these really bad discriminatory policies, redlining, real estate bias steering, other kinds of block busting, other kinds of policies, what we see, most of those really bad discriminatory policies were abolished on paper in 1968 with the passage of the Fair Housing Act, right? Here's the kicker. This is the generational implication. The Black home ownership rate today is less than it was in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was passed. So we're struggling, the gap between white home ownership, the percentage gap between white home ownership and Black home ownership is worse today than it was in the year 1900. That's according to a Zillow study. So the reality is, it's deep and it's impactful. And why I think it's so important about access to property and ownership is where you live influences your wealth, right? It influences access to the public schools that your kids will go to. It influences your health because oftentimes, from food deserts to bank deserts to not having access to greenways, hell, to being exposed to environmental toxins, all of that stuff is associated with where you live, and where you live influences the level of police encounters that you have. So it's a lot, y'all. It's a whole lot happening up in here.
So one thing I just want to touch on, this ain't even a question, it's just a thought that came into my mind. When you see white people talk about there is no white privilege, or that they're not accessing white privilege, that is just ignorance at its best, because when you say $156 billion is the difference in home equity or Black equity in America from $1 just because of things they did in 1930, 1920, 1900s, and all of this other stuff, you cannot tell me that white privilege, it isn't paramount still to this day.
No doubt about it, brother, man. I'm with you 100%, dude. Let me just amplify your position and your point, but by making a couple of other additional comments. Okay, so when white people say that they don't experience white advantage or white privilege, I hit them with three policies, three policies that almost exclusively benefited them. Homestead Act, 1862. The Homestead Act, 1862, was only available for European immigrants. It gave free land, 160 acres of free land in 5 years. All you had to do was improve it. That could be build a shack on it, grow some crops on it, 160 acres for an individual. Double it for a family, 320 acres for a family. It's only available for white people, not Blacks, not Latinos, not Asians, right? Not Native Americans, only white people. And it's west of the Mississippi River. So that's the first policy, right? And once you start subdividing those acres, y'all know they're selling third acres, quarter acres for $100K in Nashville, right? So that's the first policy, right? That's the first policy, Homestead Act. Second policy is Social Security Act. When the Social Security Act was passed in 1935, in order to get the Southern white politicians to support it, which was the Dixiecrats, they were Democrats at the time, they call them Dixiecrats, to support it, they had to exclude two communities: sharecroppers or farm workers and domestics, disproportionately held by Black people, right? The predominant job for Black women into the 1960s was a domestic. So when you outlaw for the first generation of Social Security's establishment, farm workers and domestics, you're outlawing disproportionately Black people. And Black dollars go to pay for the Social Security benefits that they can't use for the first generation that it's established. That's number two. Number three, the GI Bill. The GI Bill created the modern middle class, primarily by giving free college, up to 4 years of free college, and a no down payment home as reward for serving in World War II. The Veterans Administration, between 1944 and 1955, during the duration of the GI Bill for World War II, lent just shy of 4 million home loans. Less than 30,000 of those home loans, or 0.7%, went to African Americans. 30,000 out of just shy of 3.9 and high change million, right? So 37% of white veterans who fought in World War II were able to come home and get a no down payment home loan, as against about 2.6, 2.7% of African American veterans, right? So what I'm suggesting to you, when white people say they have never gotten privilege, I'm like, maybe you didn't, but your granddaddy did. Your great-great-granddaddy absolutely did. And so the reality, man, is that some people, use a baseball analogy, some people are born on third base, and when they score, when they run them 90 feet, They over here dancing about how great they are, how much they overcame their odds, how they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. There are Black folks born in the dugout. We're not even on the playing field, right? We may not even be in the damn in the stadium, frankly, right? And so for me, for somebody to make an argument about hard work equals upward mobility, Black people need to work harder. My explanation to them is, who worked harder than the enslaved? I'll wait. and it shuts the party down, right? So yeah, nobody, right? Can't see to can't see, sun up to sundown, right? So I think what's unfortunate is that you have to have an arsenal of evidence to be able to intellectually box your way out of conversations with people around race. But with enough reading, when I was younger, before I read a lot of this stuff that I read, I would have interracial conversations about race, and I would leave hot. I would leave pissed off. I'd be like, damn it, I should have said this, right? I'd be thinking about it for 2, 3, 4 weeks. I'd be like, damn it, the next time I'm gonna get them if they say something else, right? Man, listen, now I'd be like, I wish I would. You know what I'm saying? I feel like tearing somebody up today, baby. And so what I tell my students a lot, is I'm like, my goal this semester is to give you an intellectual arsenal so that you can defend yourself when needed. So yeah, dude, Homestead Act, Social Security, GI Bill, slap them down. Say that dumb stuff around you.
Yeah. Now, I do have a question for you. So I know everything that we've talked about, this is kind of what we're faced with. What do you think is really the true solution to get around some of these things as we look at it? Because I know I looked at a study that like 64% of the millennials, which makes you from, I think it's like 25 to 40, or even having buyer's remorse. But outside of that particular instance, what do you think really moving forward could prevent that's pretty much the system put in place? Because even though I know it's been abolished, I'm pretty sure it's still that unwritten rule in certain communities, like, hey, let's make sure we really vet these people before we sell the homes. And you just don't have to put it on paper, so it's not anything that you could, get sued for. But if me and you and Spears and Justin all have a conversation, then we know exactly what's going on. Like, don't sell unless we have to. So I think it's still kind of the unwritten rule, because I've seen people be faced with it. But what do you think is a resolution to some of the things that we're faced with moving forward?
Well, man, I think part of the struggle, it's a great question. And I think that solutions for me are difficult because the question becomes, what's the goal? If the goal is to be on par with communities who've had a, multi-century head start, right? Then that makes you just want to get in the fetal position and suck your thumb and be like, man, I don't know if I can handle all that, right? Because, Mos Def said it best, man. You got people living off of slave trader paper, right? In real life, right? And so part of the challenge, I think, is that I don't personally compare my progress to what white people are doing, because it's not a fair comparison. It's an apples to oranges comparison, if that makes sense, right? Because, Black people creating wealth and creating access to home ownership and creating access to legacy is really new. Like, man, Black people were other people's assets. Literally, our bodies were other people's assets for almost 2.5 centuries. Add another century of segregation and marginalization and economic exploitation to that. And for most Black people, wealth is really new, man, like a generation or two, man. And all you got to do is go to a family, holiday function to see that throwaway meat has become, or has generationally been, a delicacy, right? Chitlins, right? Pig intestines. I got family members in northern Louisiana who eat pickled pig lip sandwiches, right? They take the lip, they shake that joint, put it in some white bread, hot sauce, take it to the head. And I'd be like, I'm good. But if it was my only meat, I'm tearing them lip sandwiches up. You know what I mean? So, it's the same thing. I got relatives in St. Louis.
Tell about Professor Woods. I've never heard of a pickled pig lip salad. That is the first.
Brother, look, I went to a family reunion in the 90s, and they went to the Piggly Wiggly. They got a jar. I mean, these things are big, bro. They're like, more than a foot tall, a jar full of these big old 6-7 inch lips, 2 inch thick, 6 inches long. And they put a couple of them lips on some white bread, throw some hot sauce on. They was like, "Hey, cousin, you want some of this?" I was like, man, I just ate. I'm good. You know what I'm saying? But I bring it up because that's throwaway meat. That's what black people, the meat that black people could afford. And I'll give you another example, man. I'm the first generation in my family to not eat what I call yard meat. What's yard meat? Any damn meat that come in the yard, rabbit, possum, raccoon, squirrel, you know what I mean? Like, and so everybody in my family's had to eat that stuff before. And I bring it up because to me, the only form of progress that'll make you feel good about your day-to-day your generational success is to compare yourself with previous generations. Does that make sense? Of your ancestors, your individual family members. How am I doing in relation to mom and big mom and them, right? Grammy and them, right? Because that's where the progress is. You can see big progress between you and your mom and your grandparents, your granddad, right? Your dad. You see big progress, uncles and aunties. So I think from my perspective, if you want positive affirmation, compare your experience to previous generations, and there's undeniable progress. And it's not to say that racism hadn't existed, because it always has been pretty damn consistent, but it's to say that throughout generations, despite white supremacy, Black families have made progress from one generation to the next, right? So that's one. So that's the positive piece. The second piece, in terms of, I would say there are three things in terms of wealth construction, basically 3 ways to make money in America. Got to own a business, got to invest in other people's business, got to own property. If you're not doing multiple of those, 2 at least, you're really not creating generational legacy or wealth. And so from my perspective, the challenge with avoiding some of these unspoken pieces is that it's harder to document today than it was historically. In the archives, you can go and be like, this is that redlining map, this is that FHA manual, this is that racism, this is the deed that says no Negroes. I don't think they even have to articulate it to that degree. They just got to raise the price point above where most Black people can pay, and it takes care of itself, right? Okay, we live in East Nashville. We moved here about three years ago in August, and we were in Antioch before then. We living there for about 9 years. We sold our house in Antioch. We're able to put down 20%. And that's the only reason why we're living here. But they're selling homes around me for like $600,000-$700,000, 2,000, 2,200 square feet. Who the hell can afford that? Like, if we didn't have a decade of equity built up that we could just kind of be like, and hit them with so we could have an affordable mortgage, we wouldn't be able to be here either, right? And so part of the struggle is that I don't think they have to make it so obvious or overt. They just have to lift the price point enough to exclude and displace the lion's share of Black people, and it'll take care of itself. It'll still be a lily white community. You know what I mean? We got white neighbors on both sides.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Prime example is that Professor Woods is when the mayor was talking about raising the taxes.
Right.
And they told him, hold on. They was like, whoa, no, you can't do that. You just can't up and raise the taxes like that on housing. Because I even said to myself, I said, yeah, Black people, some of these Black people not gonna be able to afford if that is passed. It is over with.
That's right. They were talking about 32% too. And can you imagine? I mean, a third, and if you're on a fixed income and you don't have an escrow that you're putting it into every month, right? So that you got to come out of pocket at the end of the month, that's a lot of damn money, man. And that's to your broader point, is that would lead to, there's an affordable housing crisis in Nashville and in cities around the country, right? Because they want the property. They don't have to be like no Negroes. They just have to raise it to a price point that most Black people can't afford. and it'll take care of itself.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. Another question for you. So I know, like, I lived in Nashville before I moved to Florida, so it's been like 4 years since I've been there. But I noticed that they were trying to come into those redlining areas to buy up the places. So I guess my question for you would be is, why is it important for the inner city people to not sell to outside buyers? Because I've heard of extremely low prices of what they're trying to buy the houses for, and compared to what they're actually selling them for, like a corner over in part of the gentrification process. So so why is it important not to actually sell the money in that particular instance?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of the reason is that, the developers, many of them, when they buy an older home, they don't want the home. They want the land under the home. they're gonna demolish the home, build two homes on top of it. So you got an older home, they may throw 200-300K at you. And the folks who don't have a whole lot of resources, 300,000, oh my God, we about to, right? But then they demolish the home and build two homes on it and sell each of them for $600,000-$700,000. So they done paid 300K to a Black community member, right, for an older home, or 200K for it, and they don't want the home. They just want to demolish it, build it up, put two more homes on there, and quadruple. They're gonna make 1.2, 1.4 million off of those two homes, and they're gonna give the Black person in the Black community, 200, 300K. So I say hold out for the best deal that you can, because they're selling. We live on one of them, split lots. And when the property assessor did our assessment, I want to say they valued just the land, not the home, just the land itself, this little half a lot, at about 140, 150, just the land. Okay. So if you got a home on there and they're not offering you 4, 5, 600, you about to get beat. And here's the challenge. It's easier to say to people, in theory, hold out, right? But here's the reality, man. Most Black people need assistance to put their family members in the ground when they pass. Like, you want to see family drama? Watch somebody who doesn't have a will go. Black folks are going to be, a lot of us will be fighting over silly stuff like a chair, you know what I mean? In terms of broader based assets, because we don't have a whole lot. I'll give you an example. We have a family friend who was a white guy, Jewish dude. He passed away. His home was paid for. His car was paid for. When his brother came up to liquidate the assets, he came up from Texas. He was like, man, look, I got a paid for Maxima. I ain't driving the Maxima back to Texas. Told my mom, you know anybody who wants the Maxima? Guess who came up on a Maxima that was paid for? Now I did, right? So I drove my Tercel all the way to New York to get the Maxima. But I'm thinking about how different that same scenario would have went had not everybody in the community had as much resources as this white dude did in Texas. He basically was like, I don't need the Maxima. Can you imagine that happening to a cash-strapped Black community? So I want to be careful I think it's important to hold out for as long as you can, but it assumes that you're in financially decent shape now to not take that immediate win. Does that make sense? I mean, like, for communities that have historically struggled over, basic stuff. When my dad passed about 6 years ago, and my aunt called me and was like, hey, nephew, we need some money to put him into the ground. I called my wife, hey, boo, they need some money. What do you feel comfortable with? She's like, let's put 5 on it. I'm not going to say what the nomination of 5, but we put 5 on it. You know what I mean? And so literally, even putting your family member in the ground, oftentimes for Black people, causes money. And so I don't want to be cavalier and be like, don't you take that 200K, hold out for 6, when the struggle could be real. But I think it's important to understand what that developer is about to do with that land. They about to get paid.
And I know your question was directed at Professor Woods, Rose, but just to piggyback on something that he said, and I know you know this, but our communities are struggling and hurting. So for somebody who may have a house, may even own the house, that house isn't feeding them. And so when the developer comes with the money, that money can feed them, their kids, or whatever the case may be. So even though there might be some equity or dollar signs in that land and in that house, it's not coming to their pockets to date. And so struggling, and you need something to help either get you out of a situation or catapult you somewhere, it's easier to say, okay, I could take this 200,000, even though your land might be worth 600,000, but they only offering 200, but that's what you need to get out that situation or that thing. So the best thing that I feel like we could do as a community, one, is educate ourselves, but then it goes back, and the reason why I'm answering, it goes back to what Professor Wood say. There's basically 3 ways that you can make money now. And as you said, own a business, invest in somebody else's business, or own land or property. And so if we educate ourselves to doing that and becoming more frugal with our money, then we wouldn't be struggling so much to where that offer is something that we have to jump on immediately. And I know you know it, but again, I'm just adding more to the to what Mr. Wood said, to what Professor Wood said, and just throwing some more on it. But it's just getting us out of that struggle. So many of us are riding the struggle bus, and we don't know how to get off the struggle bus. And a lot of times we're not doing things as what we're doing right now to educate people to get off the struggle bus. And so therefore, it's something that we need to do. We need to hold off on the offer, but a lot of us can't. So it's like a catch-22. And if you do, don't.
Yeah, and I completely get where you're coming from. Trust me, I'm not overlooking the struggle, not even just trying to, belittle anyone with it. But when I think about this is that, yeah, they could come in with the cash and they could kind of fix you as a quick fix. But if you still don't know the important things that we've mentioned, even within this conversation, you're still going to be right in the same position, because I know it's still competitive to even get apartments. So if you take that 200 or 300K and you don't get back in the housing market, like, where do you go from there? So now you're homeless with money that you still didn't know how to manage previously. If you ran into it, unless it was an issue where you were just, in an unfortunate time. But 9 times out of 10, like we've talked about, we don't have the financial literacy. So where do you go from there? Even though you've been put, they've given you 200 or 300,000, but where do you go next? That's my thing. It's like, yeah, they could come in with the quick fix. Here's the cash, but they know for a fact you're stuck after that. Like, because everywhere around you is going to be higher than where you were just at, because this is pretty much the lowest part of the city. That's my thing. Is like, okay, just give us the importance of why not, and just hold on to it, because I would rather try to find a way to make that happen and meet the demand than just sell like what's going on. That would just be me.
Right. And I think as Black people, when you get that amount of money in your hand that you never had before, that's when we go out and splurge on stuff that don't matter. We buying another car, we helping somebody out, we helping this person out, and then next you don't know, that 200K gone. When you should have either invested, started a business, or took 20% and put it on a house. Put on another house, a bigger house, where you can probably move granny and big mama or whoever having health issues that you can have a close eye over and look over at that point in time. So I think we in the process, as Professor Wood says, you look at, take a look back at your people in your family, where you come from. I think we are beginning to turn that needle a little bit, and we starting to learn a little bit more as the internet has been good for us, as being able to look up things and look up the stock market and look up how to create a business. And we start looking up all the stuff online and reading more, so it can help us out to be better with our money and our funds. That the secret you're not gonna get all the secrets, but some of the secrets is online, where it can kind of help us out and do that. As I was talking about my daughter's birthday, that she get online to look up a lot of stuff. She going to school to do hair. She do hair, make wigs and nails and all this stuff. She already a few steps ahead. And I tell her, slow down. You ain't got your business license yet. You gonna mess around and get us sued out here. So let's finish your school and get your license, and then you already know what you need to do after you get out.
Well, and I'll say this. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say this too. One of the things that I think is important, uh, my mom has been an avid thrift shopper most of my life, right? She's real good with money, and I'm pretty decent with money now because I don't spend it. And I married a woman who is more frugal than me, which is hard to do. And so if she don't spend it, I don't spend it. We gonna have some, right? But here's something I want to share in terms of like what my mom told me that made me into a avid saver. So what mom said to me was this. She said, during slavery, white people branded black bodies with their initials to differentiate their blacks from their neighbors' blacks. She said, today, Black people spend money that we don't have to brand ourselves with the designer labels and designer names of people who were the descendants of folks who used to own our folk. I said, doggone it. And so she was like, Fendi, Prada, Gucci, right? In terms of like that literal brand, that was a burning brand. And I think it's important when you racialize consumption, it makes you not want to spend money on nothing. I don't want to give them money than people who don't like Black people most of the times any more of my resources. So how can I think about constructing a financial legacy that may last 2, 3, 4, 5 generations and start the process, right? I'm not suggesting that, we're going to be out, dig our way out in one generation, but starting the process. There's a great book for investing called Millionaire Teacher that talks a lot about index funds and basically not buying individual stocks, but buying big chunks of the market and holding those chunks over time, right? For a couple generations. In the normal stock market, every 7 years, whatever you have in the market today doubles in 7 years, right? And so if you can imagine, Warren Buffett, who's a 100 billionaire, started his first investment at 10 years old. And Warren Buffett said famously, I waited 10 years too late. Should have started as a baby because he missed another double, you know what I mean? From 0 to 10. And so I bring it up because if what you put in the market now and don't touch doubles every 7 years, think about how much faster it doubles if you invest every month. Right. And so this is something we're talking about, engaging our community and educating our community. I started investing at 25. Had I started at 18, I'd probably be retired right now. I'd literally probably be on a beach right now. I'm not mad. I will be sooner rather than later. But the point is that I think part of the struggle is getting folks to think about ways to create wealth as early as possible. Getting your 19-year-old to start thinking about some index funds, start thinking about investments, start thinking about putting money away for property for when she's available to, or for a business. So I think part of my encouragement for for young people is, we're the inheritors of a 20 generation long struggle for freedom in the Black community. And we can't pay our ancestors back directly, but what we can do is we can pay it forward and start thinking about ways, because at the end of the day, we're all going to be ancestors at some point, hopefully a long, long time from now, right? But what we're going to be judged eventually is what we've done with the resources that we inherited and the vision that we had to influence future generations. And so to me, if we start thinking about how can you influence 2, 3, 4, 5 generations into the future, then it's not about my sneakers today. it's not about my rims today. It's about laying a legacy that's way bigger than my individual needs, right? My individual desires. So I think that would be something that, I'm a big component of. I'm a big fan of trying to educate our youth on long-term saving, whether it's for housing or for investing.
I'm gonna hit our listeners like the Wayans used to do in their movies, Keenan and Damon. Message, because that's a message right there. So you hit it on the head, and the way that you broke it down, I never looked at it that way. Like Fendi brand, Gucci brand, Prada brand, and just to go back and think of how your ancestors were branded by people who still own them labels. They just changed the branding mechanism from actually branding your body physically to branding your body materialistically. And you're still in the same situation that you were 400 years ago, or that your ancestors were 400 years ago, with the branding mechanisms of being broke and keeping you broke for the most part. Because, there are some people who are able to access those brands and not be broke. But for majority of us, if we access them brands, we're going broke over them brands. And then when you even think about the name of it, brands, clothing brands, brand, it's still branding you. And they, as you stated earlier with, the housing association and all of this other stuff, the FCA and all of that, they change the description or the wording just a little bit, but it all still means the same thing. And when you break it down and look at it from that aspect, it is totally eye-opening and mind-blowing. Like, damn, they still branding our asses in 2021. And it's crazy because I never even looked at it that way. Like, and again, I know me and Rose talk all the time about, buying black, shopping black, wearing black, and all this other stuff. But, it's still sometimes hard to do it completely, just because of, one, to be honest, we are a little difficult to work with. But then two, the opportunity and the access to knowing where you could buy drawers from a black person, where you could buy socks made by a black person, where you could do all of this other stuff. And then to think we're still getting branded by the people who was trying to brand us ever since they brought us over in the transatlantic slave trade. And that's crazy. I never looked at it like that. So what you said was definitely a message and empowering, and makes me even more want to go about being deliberate and intentional in all black, supporting everything black and trying to find everything black as possible. And so I appreciate that message from you, because again, even for myself, I'm not an ignorant person at all, but I'm not the wisest or the most knowledgeable person either. But I never even looked at things from that aspect. And for you just to word it that way, that was profound. So I appreciate you, Professor Woods.
My pleasure, man. Hey, I appreciate my mama. That's my mama. That ain't even me. That's me being like, look, I've been a thrift shop dude ever since, man. I'm gonna come up, because if I can get something that looks decent, forget the brand, but it's just a decent clothes, decent whatever, I'd rather put the extra money in an index fund or invest in a rental property. You know what I mean? Versus enriching somebody that don't care about us.
Yeah, and just to kind of speak on that, or just piggybacking with the brands, I was looking at like this study is that a lot of the brands that they kind of push into the pop culture aren't even brands that they even cherish anymore. It's just more or less a dying off brands. But since they've had the ability to get it into rap music per se, now those brands are back flourishing. And then it's like, we'll find every reason not to support our own, but then we will buy them ugly ass Balenciaga shoes and things like that just to make them cool and they look just like Skechers. You feel me? So it's like, the brand has become so much of like a token of my accomplishments that we've lost the fact that you're paying $1,200 for some shoes that literally look like the $20 shoes at Payless, and there's not any difference. They just put Balenciaga on the side. You laughed at them then, laugh at them now. But our mind is so, the vanity slaves just in us just makes it, oh, I got these, I spent this on some shoes. Okay, cool. But to your point, I'd rather put that in, you know, some stocks and bonds, you know, anything. I would rather put it in a BSCD account and just let it sit there and just recoup, you know, 2% a year at the lowest rate before I just spend it on something like that. So, you know, back to my point, that's why Flake needs to really push this merchandise to get this out there, because that is an actual Black brand that isn't from your oppressor. So that's it. That's all I got.
No, and that's everything, man. And, you know, you think about this. I mean, look, you know, a lot of us, you know, think about BMWs and Benzes and stuff. I mean, German folk don't like Black people. Right? I mean, like, when you break it down that way, when you racialize it, you're like, oh, hell no, I ain't giving up. So that's my point. Like, if you're going to get frustrated and mad about how the police treat Black people, right? But then go out of your way to spend your money on brand names so that you can identify with them and be like, yo, I got this much on this, that. I think, and I'm not mad at why we do it. I get why we do it. I also think, though, that changing the trajectory of what your vision is beyond just your individual life and starting to think about laying a seed down. Look, we have a wall of fame in our house, wall of fame of ancestors. And the oldest photograph that we have goes back 5 generations, right? So I told you when I went to that family reunion when we were eating pig lips. Well, I went to the oldest family member right away and was like, who, you know, people who were like 3 generations removed, like my grandfather's aunties were still alive in the 90s. And they gave me some photographs, gave me some names so I could do some ancestry research. And we found out that I have a family member who he's 5 generations removed from me. He's my grandfather's grandfather. He was the first person in my family to go to college. And he went to college like circa Plessy versus Ferguson, like in the early 1890s, right? And the best job he could get with that degree was a sharecropper. But he went to college and he taught Black people how to read and write in the local church. His daughter, my grandfather's mom, died of tuberculosis when she was 20. So my grandfather ended up getting an undergrad degree, a couple master's degrees, was a police officer, best job he could get at the time. My mom got a master's degree and was a daycare director, right? So my PhD is the first time that I'm actually using, first generation to use my education to tangibly have a different kind of job trajectory than I would have had, previous generations would have had. Anyway, I look on that wall of fame and this guy, his name was John Milton Smith. He died in 1940 and I never met him. She was gone, more than a generation before I was born. But he changed the trajectory of my family educationally. Like everybody since him who stayed alive has gone on to at least get a master's degree. That dude changed the game educationally, not financially, because he was a sharecropper, right? But educationally, he changed the game. And so that's got me thinking, well, damn, if I can, in 5 generations, if I can make it on somebody else's wall of fame, that's one hell of a damn legacy. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, and so that wall of fame not only honors my ancestors, but it also inspires me to create a legacy for myself that'll be 3-5 generations down the line too, right? And so once you start thinking about your lived experiences generationally, then you're willing to do additional sacrifices because it's way bigger than you. You owe the ancestors, and unborn generations are waiting for you to be your absolute best self because they didn't ask to be born, right? But the decisions that you make today will influence the life chances that these unborn generations have. Does that make sense? And to me, that's powerful, dude. Like Diane Nash a couple of years ago came to MTSU and was speaking about the civil rights struggle that she went through and all of the sacrifices that she went through to lay the foundation for integration today. And people asked her what her motivation was. You know what she said? She said, I didn't know you, but I loved you. and I was willing to risk my life for you. I was like, yo, that should be on everybody's forehead, yo. You know what I mean? Like that is really, really inspirational and powerful. And I think as a community, if we could think about future generations more, I think the rest of this stuff would take care of itself. I really do. We'd save better. We'd invest more. We'd be more about our kids, right? We'd be more about our family. I think it would just take care of itself, man. So I'm encouraged because I think I see purpose in generational legacy. And I encourage everybody to not just understand the history, but to find strength in it. You know, if slavery can't defeat Black people, we can survive slavery and segregation, lynching and police terror. What can we not do? I'll wait.
Yeah, we can do it all. We can do it all. And I'm happy that the tide is turning. You're starting to see more Black people have conversations about generational legacy, generational wealth. I'm glad you brought that up because that is a conversation that is being had. More Black people starting to talk about, investing in the stock market and things of that nature. It's a couple of groups that's going around, and even in the group that's not about the stock market, we are still pinging something in there and saying, "Hey, watch out for this, watch out for that." So I'm glad to see that changing. As I grew up, stock market was I never brought up my house or spoke about. I didn't know anything about it. My parents do own some stocks, but I was like, why y'all didn't never say anything to me? Like, it never was mentioned. So it was kind of one of those things. I found out my parents still holding on some stock from Pepsi from the 70s, 80s, or whatever. But it was just something that we just never talked about. So it's just glad to see, us as Black people, being a little bit more comfortable discussing finances and property and having renters property and investing in this business, investing in that business and starting a business and things of that nature. So I'm just glad to see that. And I appreciate you coming on and dropping all the gems that you have tonight. So I greatly appreciate that.
It's been my pleasure, gentlemen, brothers. I appreciate y'all, man.
Well, go ahead, Flake.
I'll say anybody have anything else for the professor. For our listeners, we went past the time, but this is well worth the time. So this was a great conversation from beginning to end. So, but we can keep going if Professor got time. If y'all got other things for him, if he has time, if you have time. I know you told me you got a 5-year-old.
Yeah, she's asleep, but I'm about to get it because she's gonna be up at 6:30 on my forehead talking about dad.
I just got one question for you, and it doesn't have to be elaborate or nothing.
Please.
It's a 2-part question. One, what is your ratio of Black to white students? And then 2, how do your white students react when you're speaking these gems and this knowledge? And I know you're unapologetic about it just from this conversation. So is there a how dare he look or attitude amongst them, or are they open because time has changed, but barely? So are they more open to the things that you are teaching them and putting out there into the atmosphere?
Yeah, it's a great question. So before I got tenure, I taught a lot of U.S. history. And in U.S. history, there were probably, I would say about 85% of the student body population was white. And there was more pushback when I taught U.S. history from the white students, in part because they didn't sign up for a class that deals with issues of race and racial discrimination. And so for me, I saw myself as kind of democratized in the past. So we talked about civil rights, we talked about Japanese internment, Chinese exclusion. We talked about a lot of these issues. And they would often be like, all we do is talk about, different groups. Since tenure, I get a lot more choice in terms of the courses that I want to teach. And so pretty much everything I teach now deals with race. It's got race in the title. So the white students that come to the class now, it's overwhelmingly Black. It's probably the inverse of US history. It's probably 80%, 85% Black. But the white students that are there are receptive because they chose purposefully to take a class that had race in the title. It's either got Black, African, African American, Africana. It's got something African or Black in the title. So they anticipate having a conversation about these issues, and they welcome it. And I'll tell you, man, I've been teaching at MTSU since 2007. And in that, almost 15 years, I've had several white students tell me, and this initially blew my mind, but now I just kind of anticipate that there will be people in my classes like this. But several students, several semesters have told me that they live in a community in rural Tennessee where there is no people of color at all. And the first person of color that they ever saw in real life was on campus at 18. That's different, dude. It's just this different. And so, right. And so you can imagine when that's the frame of reference and the perspective that they're bringing, being exposed to some of the stuff that I talk about, they're like, what in the hell? How come we didn't learn about this? And so if they see me, they're going to get some things for sure. Absolutely. And I want them to understand it's not individual, it's not personal, it's policy-based, it's structural, it's systemic. It's about institutions and not about individual, choice or behavior. And that we all inherited, none of us created this stuff, but we inherited, and therefore it matters, right?
Yeah. And as we say often, pro-Black does not mean anti-white or anti-anything, but we are pro ourselves and our culture and our people, because we are at the bottom of the totem pole, and we're trying to get some equity and equality in this world that we call home because it was built on the backs of us.
Absolutely.
But if nobody has anything else, I will go into our Black Business Minute, and then so we can also jump into our Supremely Black Person of the Week. So again, when I go into a Black Business Minute, y'all not gonna see me on the screen. For the people who tune in on YouTube, my laptop crashed, so I'm waiting on them to get it fixed for me. So I'm about to go into our Black Business Minute. So this week for our Black Business Minute, we have Mariah, and it's MIIRIYA.com. And Mariah is an app that lets you shop Black-owned businesses all on one app, like Amazon or Etsy. The word Mariah is a word from the African language of Bambara, Diulu, my native language. The word means thoughts and ideas. It can be used in many ways. In specific cases, you can use it with other words to mean philosophers or thinkers. We are extremely new and will continue to grow and improve. Please continue to support us. Mariah.com gathers people who believe in ideas, change, and come together as creatives and thinkers to make those ideas come true. It's a place that aims to provide you with whatever comes to mind. Vendors can sign up by using the human icon at the top right on the website, or the human icon at the bottom right when you open the mobile app. There are no transaction fees and no listing fees. I pay the vendor's credit card and PayPal fees out of pocket as well, so they get 100% of their earnings. I also pay out of pocket to maintain the website's bills. My goal is to create a convenience for shoppers who want to support Black businesses seamlessly, while also creating surge and recirculating the Black dollar. So it's Mariah.com. They have an app, and you could go to MIIRIYA.com. Mariah, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I'm probably butchering it, but Mariah.com, and that's our Black Business Minute. Again, as we talked about earlier about branding yourself, this is a way to be unbranded, to diversify yourself into our culture and our community, and to support and to circulate the Black dollar, like they said in their statement. So our Black Business Black Business Minute is Mariah.com. Hopefully I'm saying the word right. If I'm not, please forgive me. But again, it's MIIRIYA.com. And that's our Black Business Minute.
Salute.
Salute to that business for sure. Our Supremely Black Person of the Week goes to Garfield Sobers as we celebrate our Caribbean month here. He's also known as Gary Sobers. He was born in 1936. He is a former cricket player who played for the West Indies between 1954 and 1974. He was a highly skilled bowler. For people who watch baseball, bowler means he basically is a pitcher if he's a bowler in cricket terms. He was an aggressive batsman and an excellent fielder. He is widely considered one of the greatest cricketers of all time. He was born in Barbados. He has scored 8,032 runs within his career with the 57.78 average. He also averaged 235 wickets. He also taken 235 wickets in the average of 34.03. He has the 5th highest batting average in Test cricket of all time. He's also in his 383rd first-class matches has scored over 28,000 runs that took over 1,000 wickets. So shout out to Mr. Garfield Sobers, who's a great cricket player and considered to be the greatest cricket player of all time. And he is a Black man from Barbados. So shout out to him. I know we don't know much about cricket. We got to, if you don't know, research it, read about it, watch a cricket match, and see what it's all about. I've never watched a full match of cricket. I'll be honest with you. I've watched some rounds. I've never watched a full match, but I have watched the game to know that part about, the batting average, the bowlers, the runs, and how you get your outs and this, that, and the other. So, but if you don't know, look him up, look up the game of cricket and learn something, because this man is being considered the greatest cricket player of all time.
Salute, brother. I mean, in any ways that we could dominate, I support it, but you get to cricket, dog.
Because America's selfish. We don't care about no other sports than what we got going on. Why we trying to put basketball on everybody else?
Exactly.
All right. Well, with that being said, for all our kings out there, put your crown on, tilt that thing to the side, let them know you are a king. For all our queens out there, put your crown on, tilt that thing to the side, let them know you are a queen. We are not 3/5 of anything. We are supremely Black, and we out.